So you're interested in starting a career in cybersecurity, but you don't know where to start. Well, the good news is you're not alone. There's tons of people who are in a very similar position. In fact, I was in that position before I started my career in cybersecurity. So let me tell you a story about how I got started in cybersecurity, and I think it's going to help you figure out a few different ways that you can get started yourself. And most importantly, it's about what you can do to take that very first step to start that long-term journey in building a career in cybersecurity. So let's dig in. My journey into cybersecurity started with computer programming. This was all the way back when I was in high school, when I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, let alone my career, but I knew it was going to be in technology. And so I started learning computer programming, and I quickly realized that while I could program, I wasn't really all that interested in it. I couldn't see myself living in a cube, just typing away all day, and that's it. So I was talking to my teacher at the time, and he recommended that I start looking into computer networking. Now, computer networking is how all the different systems in the world connect together and communicate. Now, I started doing some research on that, and I stumbled upon the security aspect of computer networking and completely fell in love. And so I bought a bunch of books and I read those cover to cover, and I was all in for cybersecurity. Now, when I say books, I mean really thick books. This was an 800-page book that I started off reading, and I read this thing probably 2 or 3 times. But don't worry, I'm going to save you from having to read this, and I'll give you all the summaries later. From the books, I graduated into what's called a capture the flag. Now, at that time, these were the early days of capture the flags, or CTFs for short. But the genesis of these are that they're little hacker challenges that you have to try to solve. Super basic to start. I mean, as simple as, hey, right click on the web page, view the source, and look for a hard-coded username and password. But I ate these things up. And there's tons of them that you can look into now. Definitely research those and try to figure out how you can do more of these to see if you're really interested in cybersecurity. But I went all in on those and just scoured the internet to find as many as I could and just tried to get as far along as I could. And I realized at this time that cybersecurity was definitely the path I was going down. And because of these CTFs, I was much more interested in how do you hack. Now, you can do that as a career, which is a penetration tester or a red teamer. And that's where you're looking at trying to break into companies as a hired gun and figure out where all those weaknesses are so that they can patch those ahead of time. Now, for me, because of where I was, I decided that I was going to go to college for this. Now, you don't necessarily have to start with college. There are plenty of different certificates and sub-degrees that are in there that you can really dig into and get the experience and show that to a potential employer to get started. But for me, I was going to college anyway, so I figured, you know what, I'm going to go for computer security. And that's what I did. Now, I was fortunate because the degree that I got was in computer networking and system administrations and security. And so I got a really broad background of not only how do computer networks operate, how do you build them from scratch, and how do you manage them, but also how do systems operate? And same thing, how do you build them from scratch? How do you maintain them? How do they work together? And when I was able to overlay security on top of that, I got a really good broad understanding of how security really works in an environment. And that really set me up for success because I had that in-depth understanding of how all of these things work. We got a playlist for that on the basics of IT, so check that out. Now, after I built this foundation of knowledge in cybersecurity and networking and systems administration, I was fortunate because I started an internship with my college's security department. And so I was in a position to start running vulnerability scans against our campus. Now, a vulnerability scan is where you're going out and checking systems to see if they have vulnerabilities that are present on them. Now, this vulnerability scanner is going to go through a whole library of different types of vulnerabilities and just see if it's susceptible or not. And then I would have to go in and validate if it was a true positive, meaning yes, it was vulnerable, or if it was a false positive, meaning that nope, it wasn't actually vulnerable, and we're just going to write that off. Now, the cool thing about this is that it really gave me exposure to what security in a true environment looks like. And this is a full-time job for people where they can go in and proactively test the defenses of their organization's environment. This falls into that penetration tester / red team bucket of security. So it's a whole career that you can build with that. Now, I did some other things in that office as well, where I was doing more data security type things, where I would go in and run another scan to look for sensitive information. We're talking things like credit card information, social security numbers, banking information, and it would go and scan all of the campus computers just to make sure that there wasn't any of that on there. And very similarly, I would go in and validate to see, was this real information or was this a false positive? And this was a way of managing the data security of that campus as well. Again, that's a whole nother career path that you can go down, where you can focus in on data security or even just the governance of data, getting into more governance, risk, and compliance. There are many paths in security, as you can tell. So that really helped me get my first foundational job in cybersecurity. And again, I was all in. And now I was starting to go out and look for full-time jobs. As I started to look for full-time jobs, I cast a fairly wide net. But there was some advice that I took to heart that I had randomly read on a blog, that I should be applying for jobs I wasn't necessarily qualified for. And so while it is a lot more work up front, it did pay off for me in the end. Now, I started off trying to apply for different positions in security operations centers, or SOC. SOCs are the units that will try to proactively monitor the environment. So these are looking at the different security tools that are in there and different sources of data and responding to it to try to identify attacks early on. Now, what I found with that was it just felt that it was really elementary for me. And so there are a lot of cool things with SOCs that you can do, but I was looking for something that had a little bit more pizzazz to it, if you will. And so I stumbled across a company called Mandiant, which at the time and still to this day is and was the leading incident response company. Now, incident response is a subset of security where you are going in and responding to a hack, meaning that you're conducting forensic analysis of systems. You're looking at log data and trying to put all these different pieces of artifacts and little bits of information together to figure out, how did an attacker break into an environment? What did they do after they got into an environment? And what did they steal? Why were they there in the first place? And so Mandiant was a leader in this, and I applied for a position for a senior consultant, which I definitely wasn't qualified for. But as luck would have it, at that very same time, they were starting to hire college grads. And so I kind of squeaked through the cracks here to get an opening where I could get an interview and just prove out what I was worth. And so as I went into those interviews, it wasn't really a test of knowledge per se, but more of how am I thinking through scenarios. And while there were some questions around pen testing, because that's what I was really applying for, there was a lot of logic-based questions. And what they were trying to understand was, how was I thinking through problems? And they were really trying to test the edges of my knowledge to see, did I have the aptitude and the potential to learn these things and grow into a consultant with Mandiant? And thankfully that paid off for both sides. And I was able to go and start my career where I thought I was going to be doing pen testing, but in reality, it started off with incident response. So I showed up my very first day at Mandiant thinking I was going to be doing pen testing, and somebody hands me a hard drive and an Encase dongle, which Encase is a software suite that allows you to do forensics on systems, and said, here you go. Tell us everything that happened on this system. I said, okay, well, I don't know how to do forensics, so we're going to learn this now. And so I looked to my left, I looked to my right, and what I realized was I was sitting around some of the smartest people in the industry. And so for me, it was time to be a sponge. And so I started asking a lot of stupid questions. I started just really digging into all this information and trying to spend as much time as I possibly could to learn the art of forensics. Now, early on in my career, a mentor told me that you should try as many things as you can to get a broad exposure to other areas of security and really find what you're passionate about. And so early on in my career, I had the opportunity to do pen testing. I had the opportunity to do forensics. I had the opportunity to do proactive assessments on organizations to kind of just see how they're doing against a security framework. And what I found was that forensics was my calling. I loved going into a system and pulling out these different artifacts and fusing them together to really figure out what the story was. And it's amazing how you can go from just these disparate pieces of information into a full story from start to finish. How did an attacker break into an environment, and what did they do? And what was their ultimate goal? And so for me, it was a massive puzzle that I was unwinding and really figuring out all these little things and how they lined up together. And so for me, forensics and incident response was my true calling. And I just went all in on that. And I spent about 6 years at Mandiant where I was leading investigations into nation-state threats. These are countries like China, Russia, Iran, breaking into the US organizations and just either stealing information or just, planting back doors and just kind of biding their time there. I did investigations into hacktivists who were just hacking for the sake of hacking. And I did a lot of investigations into organized crime where they were breaking into retailers and stealing credit card information that they can then turn into financial gain for themselves. So it was a really cool exposure to a lot of different things. But I reached a point in my career at Mandiant where it had become a really large company, and I wanted to get back to a startup where I could really feel close to the customer and do what I thought was in their best interest, which was investigate, get them back to where they were before, and help them get secure so that this doesn't happen to them again in the future. So I took that to an extreme and went to a startup where I was the 5th employee to join the company. And I took on a big jump for myself where I was leading professional services, meaning I was running all of the services for that company. Now, I was still hands-on with investigations, and at this time, it was the age of ransomware. And so I started at a really cool time where ransomware was just starting to shift from single system infections to enterprise-wide infections. And so I was really able to ride this ransomware wave where not only was I doing investigations, but I was doing negotiations with these threat actors to try to figure out how can we negotiate down that ransom to something that's more palatable, that could be paid when the backups weren't available for that company. And so I had the opportunity not only to ride that ransomware wave, but also to start building out teams and building out entire businesses to support this incident response structure. And so I did that for a long time and was able to continue to do more and more with that. And so I took a little bit of a break from IR where I stepped into a business development and a partnership role where I was really just building relationships and trying to help companies use technology to support their investigations. And after doing that for about a year, I got that startup itch again. And so I co-founded a company called Mox 5 where the focus was on business recovery. So following a ransomware attack, companies struggle to get back up and running. Whether they're going to buy a decryption utility or not, it's still a massive effort to get back up and running following all of your systems being encrypted. And so I built a company that was focused on how do you restore operations. It's still a security function, and most of it was focused on incident management, of really taking ownership over the response efforts and guiding the clients through these recovery steps because it was a large number of steps that had to be taken. So the focus was more incident management, more IT, but still solidly placed in the incident response bucket. And so with that, I was really able to see a different side of security because it was more along the lines of how do you get people back up and running? And then how do you build these resilient infrastructures that are less susceptible to ransomware in the future? And so this touches on more of like a security engineering type role where you're focused on how do you securely build an environment so that it can be resilient against cyber attacks. And this is a whole nother career field for you in cybersecurity where you don't necessarily be on the response side, but you can be in the field of trying to prevent these attacks from happening to an organization in the first place. So after having done incident response for over a decade, I was done with it. Incident response is a grind. It's a lot of work. You're working long hours, you're working weekends, you're working holidays. Attackers don't really care when it is for you. They just want their money. So I decided to start exploring different options. And, I'd reached a point in my career where I had built out teams, I had built out service lines. And so I was interested in trying my hand at protecting security for a whole organization. And so I decided to go down the Chief Information Security Officer route, the CISO route. Now, this is very different than consulting, and it's a very different pace. But I knew ahead of time that if I was just full-time on security, I probably would get a little bored. And a lot of that is just because I was in that incident response field for so long. I needed to have my hands in different things and kind of feel busy, but also productive at the same time. And that's not to say that internal focus CISOs only aren't productive. That's not to say that in any means. But for me, I wanted to be able to support marketing functions. I wanted to be able to support the revenue generating areas of the business. And so I went down a route of a marketing CISO or a field CISO. It depends on who you talk to. Some of them are different terms there. But the general sense is that this is a CISO role that is tied to the customer and other areas of the business and really supporting all functions, not just internal security, but also the marketing functions and the sales functions. And so for me, in my current role as a CISO, what I'm focused on is internal security, keeping the company safe, but also supporting our customers, supporting our product team. I do a lot with product and helping shape the vision of what we're building and how that can help our customers. And so this gives me a lot of different hats to wear, and it keeps things interesting for me. I'm not just focused in on internal security. I spend a lot of time there, but I also spend a lot of time on other areas of the business. And so the important thing here to understand is that there are many flavors of CISOs, and this is true for every role in cybersecurity. It's not just a one-size-fits-all solution. You can really find these little areas and pockets within cybersecurity that fit your excitement areas, the things that really drive you, that motivate you. And you can really keep that going for as long as you want. And I think that's the beauty of cybersecurity is that you can jump around into all these different areas of cybersecurity and still continue forward momentum in your career. You don't need to make a total shift and lose everything that you did before, because there's so many different areas of cybersecurity that build on each other. So to wrap all of this up, there's a few key takeaways that I want you to have from this. Number one, when you're starting your career off, don't get overwhelmed by the number of options that are available in cybersecurity. There are a lot, but start to dabble and just try to see what excites you. What is that internal motivational drive that you're getting from just curiosity, right? What questions are you asking? What's really intriguing to you? Where are you naturally spending your time researching? Those are good indications of things that you should try to lean into and find ways that you can lean into that, whether that is doing an internship, whether that is doing different projects on the side, download a virtual machine and try some different things out. These are all things that you can put on a resume if you're early on in your career, or even if you're later in your career. You can have the option of going to college for these things. There's so many universities that are available that have degrees in cybersecurity or even deep dives like digital forensics. If you don't want to go the college route, look at the certificate route. There are plenty of certs out there that will provide you a mechanism to learn the foundational knowledge that you need to step into a role. Whether it's going to be pen testing or digital forensics or whatever, there's so many different certs that are out there. Again, just go wide at first to figure out where are you curious and what kind of gets you excited and gets you interested, and then go deeper on those areas. Once you have that foundational knowledge and you're ready to start applying for jobs, it's going to be a frustrating experience. Unfortunately, you're going to have to apply to a lot of different jobs, and that's just the nature of the beast. But you can separate yourself out by putting these projects and putting these internships on your resume to really make that difference and stand out from the crowd. And the last thing I'll leave you with is networking. Get on LinkedIn. Start introducing yourself to people. Go to different conferences and just get out there and start meeting people. And it is terrifying at first. I totally get it. I am an introvert by nature, but it takes a lot to go out and do that. But once you do, you can start building these reps and it becomes easier. I promise you that. But as you build these different networks, you'll start to notice that opportunities just start to present themselves to you. Different job offers or openings that you can apply to. These sort of things just start happening organically, but they happen because you put yourself in that position to succeed. And so as you start your search for cybersecurity, or even if you're later on, the other thing that I'll tell you is one of the best pieces of advice that I got in my career. Make sure that you're running to something, not away from something. And now this is going to be important for your careers because you want to make sure that you're not just running away from a bad situation. You want to make sure that you're running towards something that's going to excite you and that you're genuinely interested in. And that's the type of stuff. Again, it goes back to this fuel, this inner desire to learn more or to execute based on something you're interested in. These are the sorts of things that you're going to naturally run to. And when you're motivated and you just have that curiosity innate inside of you, you're going to rock every position that you're in. So hopefully my story has given you some ideas on how you can get started on your journey. Or if you're further along in your journey, that, maybe it'll give you an idea of what that next step could be for you. But at the end of the day, make sure that you're doing what is right for you and is going to propel you in your career. If this was valuable, check out my other material. If you're just learning cybersecurity, or if you're just looking at some deep dives into different topics, and most importantly, hit that like button, leave some comments. What was helpful for you in your career? Or what questions do you have in your career right now that you feel stuck? And I'm happy to help you through those. If this is valuable for you, subscribe to the channel. The more people that we have in this community, the more people that we can help break into cyber and get their career started. All right, thanks. We'll see you soon.